thank you for taking the time to speak with us, Bishop Denis.
Uh-huh.
As a young person, and sort of starting out in life, I've sort of got all my sort of options laid out in front of me, and I was wondering what it was like for you when you were sort of, you'd kind of come out of school, and sort of how you went about making the decisions that would shape the rest of your life.
Well, I actually made the decisions when I was still at school, because I started off at what was known as Holy Name Seminary when I was a 13-year-old, which meant I did all my secondary schooling in this minor seminary, which was based in Christchurch, where my brother had gone there before me, and he was coming home and telling stories and bringing seminarians, the young seminarians with him. I think the bug caught there, and so I did secondary schooling as a seminarian. We used to have to wear satans and do all sorts of strange things. We would think that's strange today, but it was natural then.
Okay, and that was for the Auckland diocese that you started?
Yes, for Auckland.
Okay. So, what was it like as, I guess, a young priest, sort of, when you first started work, and how was it different to the experience of the priests you've sort of guided through their vocations now?
I was ordained priest in 1962, and that was the first year of the Second Vatican Council. So when I was first ordained a priest, we were celebrating Mass in Latin, and we celebrated Mass with our back to the people. So then my early years of priesthood were those really exciting years when the influence of the Second Vatican Council started taking place, and we were able to celebrate Mass in English, and we were able to face the people as we celebrated Mass, and all those other changes that took place. And that was a result of the Second Vatican Council.
Okay.
They were exciting times, yeah.
How great was the effect of the council on your priesthood and your service as a bishop?
It played a big part in my development. I was just so lucky in a way that I'd only been ordained a year or two, and the reforms of the Second Vatican Council were starting to come through. And I was my first appointment was in Gisborne. So I was there for 5 years, and that was a sort of a nice. There was a beautiful parish, lovely community, and a sort of a little quieter, being in a quiet area of New Zealand. It was an ideal place in which to sort of learn the teaching of the Second Vatican Council and try and put it into practice. Yeah, so I had 5 years there. Then I was transferred to Auckland and spent the next 7 years in Auckland.
Okay, and did you ever expect to become a bishop and to serve for such a long time as a bishop?
Never.
Never?
No, you never. I don't think anybody expects it. I got the shock of my life because after I'd been a priest for about 15 years, or less than that, when I sort of felt the call to become a missionary, so I volunteered to become a missionary priest, and I went up to the Pacific Islands. I was in Tonga. And it was while I was in Tonga as a missionary that I was asked by Pope Paul VI to become a bishop in the Cook Islands. So, and that just came out of the blue. You don't expect it. I often tell people about how I was on this lovely island called Awa, and in Holy Week the Bishop of Tonga called me over. And I thought that I was I'd broken protocol or done something or other, because to be called over in Holy Week. But he called me over because he'd been asked by the nuncio in Wellington to find me and tell me that I was being asked by Paul VI to be Bishop of the Cook Islands and Niue. So, and now when Bishop Finau, the Bishop of Tonga, told me, he said, "Denis, I don't know what it is, but this sort of thing only happens to idiots like you and me."
Okay. And so you were Bishop of Rarotonga, which I imagine is quite different to being Bishop of Hamilton, and you're also Bishop of Auckland. So how did your experience as a bishop change in the service as a shepherd for those three dioceses?
It was a great schooling in a way to be Bishop of Rarotonga for the first 6 years. I was bishop in Rarotonga, and they were small communities. I mean, the total Catholic population at that time in the Cook Islands and Niue was 2,500, which is about the size of an average parish in New Zealand, you know. And but they were all small communities scattered over 1 million square miles of ocean. And it was a quiet area again, so I was able to learn, as it were, the tricks of the trade. And then I was appointed to Auckland, and I can remember getting to Auckland and thinking, you know, the last 6 years has been easy when you think of the changes that were taking place in Auckland. I got there in 1983, and there was sort of a revolution taking place. We were starting to welcome into the country all sorts of different ethnic groups. There had been them in the past in Auckland, but you know, in recent years the number of Asians and Pacific Islanders who have come and settled in Auckland especially, but it's spreading down now to this diocese. It's spreading all over the country. Wherever you go now, like I can go to remote parishes in Hamilton diocese and find Filipino families.
Yes.
It's amazing the change that's taking place in the demography of each diocese in New Zealand.
How much responsibility did you feel as a bishop and as a leader to all of these different dioceses and all these different ethnic groups, and how did that responsibility sort of weigh down upon you? I imagine it was quite hard at times and quite stressful.
Yes, I was very fortunate when I got to New Zealand in the 1980s, 1983, the big intake at that time was the Pacific Islanders, and having worked in Tonga and then in the Cook Islands, that was a great benefit and help to me, because the people felt as though they owned you,
yes,
even though they were living and trying to settle into life in New Zealand. I often used to say that when I arrived in Auckland in 1983, and I remember going out to De La Salle College in Mangere, and here were all these Samoan, Tongan, Fijian young people who'd come from the islands, and they were really struggling. By the time I left and was transferred here after 12 years, I'd go out to De La Salle College, and there were these sophisticated Polynesians who were Kiwis really, you know, and spoke with a Kiwi accent, and they were that, you know, that much more mature, I think, than the ones I first found when I got to Auckland. Yeah.
So, as a bishop, you would have had to make plenty of difficult decisions, and plenty of decisions that are going to change the lives of those you're taking care of. How did you approach those sort of decisions, and what sort of approach would you take to making such difficult choices?
Well, the big challenge that faced me, I can remember I arrived in 1983, and one of the first people who came to interview me was a gentleman by the name of Pat Holt, who was the director of the New Zealand Catholic Education Office. And he came to me and he said, do you know much about integration? The schools are being integrated, the Catholic schools are being integrated into the state system. And he said, do you know much about integration? I said, no, I've been away for 6 years, so I've been watching it from the sidelines, as it were. He said, do you know that it's now 1983, it's 8 years since the Integration Act was passed, and there's not one school in your diocese that's been integrated yet. So that gave me a bit of a shock, and so my response to it was that because I was a greenhorn in it, I felt I needed as much help as possible. So there was a very lively principal out of De La Salle College in Mangere East by the name of Brother Pat Lynch, who's now the director of NZCEO, and so I got hold of him, and he took all the weight off my shoulders in a way, because he had that energy, and we built up a team that enabled us to integrate all the schools in a short passage of time, really. Because
I imagine the being able to sort of delegate and something as part of being a good leader, and
it is, I think, yeah. But the other thing about it is that like I've been having farewells in the last few days, and the groups that I've had around me, I mean, we wouldn't have been able to do half the things in this diocese if it wasn't for wise collaboration. And I mean, I've had wonderful people on the Diocesan Finance Council, on our Schools Council, on the Diocesan Pastoral Council, who've, in a way you share the burden with them, and their faith really shines out as they commit themselves generously to the church. Yeah.
Okay. How has the role of bishop changed over time? Because, back in the 1980s, there was probably a completely different atmosphere to, say, modern times, and you've been bishop through numerous papacies, which I guess all have their different influences over the way you lead. So how has the role changed?
One of the amazing things to me is that I've actually been a bishop under 5 different popes.
Oh, wow.
Which is quite unique, I think, to be. Well, mind you, I was appointed by Paul VI, and the shock must have been too great for him because he died here. And then we had John Paul I, who only lived for a month as Pope. And then all through the papacy of John Paul II, which was one of the longest in the history of the Church, in Benedict and now Francis. So it's been a great privilege. But you're right, there has been quite a change. Like I was ordained by Archbishop